Hi, I'm Frank and welcome to my woodturning channel. This week I'm going to turn some Bravery Bead bowls. The Bravery Bead bowl program is something a few woodturning clubs in Ontario have undertaken with the Sick Kids Hospital. It's an initiative where we're giving back to the community, and basically we make bowls that go to sick kids, and when children get treatments, they get a bead every time they get a treatment. And some of these poor kids get hundreds of beads. And the bowls that we donate to them are what they use to keep their beads in. So I'm going to try some bowls in three different ways. This is a piece of walnut, and I'll turn an end grain bowl here with a lid of some sort. This is just a big piece of butternut, and I'm going to cut that up, make it high enough so I'll be able to get a Bravery Bead bowl out of it. And then this is a piece of ash. So I know some people love to do segmented work for their Bravery Bead bowls, but I'm not really into segmented work. I mainly like to work with solid pieces of wood. So these ones will be solid, and this will just have one glue joint basically. So let's see what we get out of these. Here I'm just showing how I would get these pieces set up to cut them out on the bandsaw. That 1/2 log piece, I use a disc on top of it. And the butternut, I'm just going to create a circle and cut that out directly. I'm just drilling each of these blanks because I'm going to use a screw chuck for each of them. After screwing this onto the screw chuck, I'm just going to true up the outside to round out the blank. And notice I have my both hearing protection, my face shield with a built-in respirator as well. Very important when you're wood turning to save your lungs and save your ears, and also the face shield part to save any debris coming off that might hit you. Now this is the very bottom of the Bravery Bead bowl, and in this case I'm just going to use an inside mortise to hold the piece. Typically I use an outside tenon, but I think in this case the piece is very light, and I'll just use a dovetail mortise on the very bottom. So I'm going to totally finish this bottom piece off, creating the mortise and then sanding it. Here I'm just using the skew on its side just to create the dovetail. And just before I take the piece off, I just make sure that my dovetail chuck actually fits in the mortise hole there, and it does. This is now the top half of the Bravery Bead bowl, and as you can see here, I've just screwed it onto the screw chuck as well. And I'm just going to create a tenon here for grabbing it, and then we'll see where we go from there. When I put the top and bottom together, I just noticed that this is just going to be too tall. So I'm actually going to cut the top half and make a lid out of it. And that way the proportions will be a lot better. So there's the bottom, the top part of the base, and then the lid. So I'm just going to part this off with a parting tool and then take a small saw and just cut the rest of it off. With the remaining piece, I'm just going to cut another mortise just to be able to hold it again when I turn it around. Here you can see how the whole bowl will look, or the base of the unit. There's the thick section and the smaller section, and they have to be glued together. So I'm going to true this up and hollow it out a little bit, and then just create a joint there so the two pieces can be glued together. What I'm finding with this butternut is I have to do a really careful cut with a very sharp tool, high speed, just to get a good finish on the surface of the butternut. And now I'm going to start just creating my joint for glue up here. And I'm going to use a kind of a lap joint, which I typically use on two-piece hollow forms. But later I found out that this really wasn't the best joint to use because I ran into some problems. I really should just have used a flat joint, just like you would for any sort of normal segmented work. I think the lap joint is probably stronger, and that's why I use it for hollow forms. But in this case, it created a line on the inside that I had to deal with. The outside was fine, but I just should have used a flat joint here. Anyway, I'm using some sandpaper to flatten off the joint just before it gets glued up. So next I'm going to work on the very bottom of the piece. So there, as you can see, the top half, there's the bottom half, and here's how they would come together, just like that. I'm just going to do some basic shaping of the base here. And my base on a Bravery Bead bowl will be a lot larger than a normal artistic piece. I don't want these Bravery Bead bowls to be very tippy. They're going to be handled by children who are very ill. So, you know, they want to be fairly stable. You know, you want a big knob on it to take the lid off, that sort of thing. You don't want to make a delicate art piece. So I'm making it probably a little thicker than I normally would, and not too curvy. I'm just finishing off the mating joint, and here you can see how it fits very well on the outside. You can hardly see the seam, But again, the mistake I made is that on the inside, because it's a kind of a lap joint, you can see the inside seam, which is no good. I should have just used a flat joint. I'm just using my 1/2-inch bowl gouge to do all of the hollowing out. This is basically like turning the inside of a bowl. So all of the cuts go from the outside rim to the inside rim. And the only thing you want to be careful of here is when you're making your final cuts to make sure you're just taking a little bit off, sharp tool, just to minimize the amount of tear out and minimize the amount of sanding. Just checking to make sure I've got a fairly even consistency in the wall and just to see how much I have left on the bottom. I'm really trying to make sure the inside looks as nice as the outside, so I'm doing my best to sand the inside really, really well. I mean, when you're making these Bravery Bead boxes, you should almost be thinking about, am I making this for my child or my grandchild? I would say you really want to take a lot of care in doing the best job you can on making these. Really nice quality, really nice finish, something that you would be proud of for giving to a child. Now that I have the bottom half and top half done, I'm going to just fit these up to make sure they fit. And then as long as they fit well, then I'm just going to apply some glue and glue them up. In this setup, you can see I've used a chuck on both sides, one on the headstock and then one in the tailstock. You don't really have to do that as long as you had a central hole in the top piece. You could just use your tailstock just the way it is. You don't really need to have a chuck there to maintain the concentricity. Now I've just remounted it and I just want to finish shaping the outside to a nice pleasing shape. And here I really got to make sure I take nice clean cuts. I don't want any tear out so I can minimize my sanding. And I've got a nice glue line there that's hardly visible, so I don't have to do anything with that. Now I'm going to work on the very top surface of the bowl, and I'm getting a nice flat clean cut there to make sure it looks pretty good. And then I'm going to hollow out the rest of it. The bottom half has been hollowed out and sanded, and now I'm just going to hollow out the top half and blend it into the bottom half. And of course, if this was all just one piece, this is where I would be scooping out the entire inside surface. This was just a little more complicated because I made it with two pieces and glued them together. Here you can see I'm just breaking through the top half, and I'll just keep turning until I get a nice clean cut here and blend it in. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but This is where I can see the seam on the inside because I used a lap joint instead of just a flat joint. So yeah, I'll try to sand it, see if that improves the situation. So even after sanding, I could still see the line. So what I'm just going to do is just take a black marker and put 3 little lines on the inside, one right on the seam and the other 2 on the other side. And now it looks like a decorative effect on the inside versus where I can see the seam. So just a little thing to do to hide things. Now there's a few little cracks there on the outside. So I might do something there just to hide those cracks. And here it is. I'm doing a little bit of pen and ink, just drawing a tree, and some of the branches of the tree go through the little crack lines, so the crack basically disappears. I've decided to do the video of this Bravery Bead bowl in 2 parts. So the first part is really going to deal with just the base, and the second part is going to deal with the lid and then the little knob that sits on the lid. So this is the end of part 1, and I finished this with Minwax Wipe-On Poly, and I don't use this product that often. And I'm not particularly happy with the finish. I suppose if I keep sanding and adding more coats to it, it might get a little better, but I'm just going to sand this back a little bit by hand, and I'm going to try some Minwax spray polyurethane. I think that'll leave a little more consistent finish, and then after that I will probably buff it as well just to get a nice surface. So we'll see how that works out, and you'll see the whole project finished up in part 2. Thanks for watching.